Okay, shall we begin? My name is Richard Weitz. I'm a senior fellow and director of the Center for Political Military Analysis here at the Hudson Institute. I want to welcome you all for coming. Thank you so much. I also want to thank the Connect US Fund for making this series possible. Thanks to them, we've held perhaps 36 of these series dealing with various issues related to nuclear security over the past 5 years. And today, thanks to their support, we have some truly great friends of Hudson and of the Connect US Fund and of all of us. Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins is the U.S. coordinator for the threat reduction programs in the Department of State. And she's been, since the U.S. has chaired the global partnership this year, she's been leading that effort. So she's a great person to talk about this program. Andy Semmel is also a long-term friend of Hudson. He is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Nuclear Nonproliferation and worked for a long time on the Hill with Senator Lugar and been involved with these programs for several decades now. And what we're going to hope to do is they're going to talk for a bit, maybe 20, 30 minutes among themselves about some of the issues that have come up in the past year of what accomplishments we've seen under the U.S. chairmanship, and then what are the challenges going forward as we transfer for the UK and beyond. And then there'll be an opportunity for discussion with the larger audience. So if you, in that regard, and I'll remind people again later, we can take people as questions from the internet and just email me at weitz@hudson.org. And we also can do Twitter, and that is at Hudson Institute, one word. So if everyone could turn off your communication devices just to make sure it doesn't interfere with the people who are watching, I'm happy to turn over the proceedings to our colleagues.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to this event. I should say, first of all, according to the Mayan calendar, this is our last full day before the world ends. So my advice to you is make the best of it. And there is, I think, a place in France that is supposed to survive all this. So look that up. I don't know what the name of the town is. Well, for this reason, among others, we're happy to have Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins here today to talk about cooperative threat reduction. She is, as Richard pointed out, the coordinator for threat reduction programs in the Department of State. And she's held this senior position since the start of the Obama administration. And it was a senior position that was created for her. So today we're going to talk about global nuclear security with special emphasis on the G8 global partnership against the spread of weapons and materials of mass destruction, and on cooperative threat reduction, particularly including the NunnLugar program. As we did last year, Bonnie and myself, when we held a similar forum, we're going to proceed as follows, as Richard quickly outlined before. I'll lead off with some very, very brief remarks just to sort of get us warmed up, and then ask Bonnie to make an introductory statement of her choosing, and then I'll ask a few questions after that, and then we'll open up the floor for questions from you as well as any questions that might come in online. Knowing of this event in advance, I've gotten a few questions that were passed on to me by email from others. So by way of a quick statement, as I mentioned, we had a similar forum like this with Bonnie and I talking about cooperative threat reduction in March of 2011. Since then, the French and the U.S. have chaired the G8 summits and the Global Partnership Working Groups at both those summits. At the French summit last year, the members decided to extend the Global Partnership beyond its 10-year mandate, ending this year, 2012. But it's not clear how long that extension will be or how programs and projects funded through the Global Partnership will be financed in the future, and we can hopefully talk about this a little bit more in our discussion. The U.S. chaired the G8 and the Global Partnership, Global Partnership Working Groups and other working groups this year, 2012, and hopefully Bonnie will walk us through some of the particulars on that summit and maybe give us some sense of the future trajectory of the global partnership to look into the future. As we all know, the heightened concern for global nuclear security grew rapidly following the fall of the Soviet Union more than 2 decades ago. And then after 9/11 terrorist attacks in the United States and elsewhere, and again after a secret nuclear supply network centered in Pakistan was exposed roughly 10 years ago. These major events and others were a catalyst for beefing up U.S. and international efforts to prevent terrorists and other rogue groups and the states that support them from acquiring and using weapons and materials, nuclear, chemical, biological, and radiological weapons and materials of mass destruction. One of the key programs, the NunnLugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, began in fiscal year 1992 with an initial $400 million that was reprogrammed out of already existing appropriated defense funds. These funds came from the Pentagon's Operations and Maintenance account, which is no mean achievement. I think it was Secretary Cheney at that time who made that decision. The NunnLugar program and actually the umbrella agreement that enables the program to function in Russia is up for renewal next year, next June, I believe it is. And there are some worrying indicators that Russia wants to either terminate the program or to drastically revise it, and I hope we can get into a discussion on that. The other cooperative threat reduction program for our discussion is, again, the Global Partnership that was created 10 years ago at the G8 Summit in Canada. The Global Partnership included a political commitment by the G8 partners to provide $20 million over 10 years, half of which would be provided by the United States, or roughly for the U.S. about $1 billion a year on average. The focus of the program was on Russia and Ukraine and other successor states of the Soviet Union, and gave special emphasis at that time to chemical weapons destruction, submarine dismantlement, fissile material disposition, and the redirection of scientists, technicians, and other professionals away from weapons and weapons-related work. This year, is the 10th year of the Global Partnership. Over time, decisions have been made to extend the Global Partnership beyond 2012, as I just mentioned at the French summit, to expand the geographic scope of the target countries beyond Russia and the successor states of the Soviet Union, to add new priorities and new emerging threats like biosecurity, bioengagement, and radiological sources, and to expand the membership of the original Global Partnership. It's now numbers 25 with Mexico's recent decision to join the Global Partnership. Not only to expand the membership, but to expand their participation. And this includes a number of international governmental organizations. The Global Partnership will more aggressively support the goals of both the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1540 and its successor resolutions, which, by the way, has a mandatory requirements to it, and also the goals and objectives of the nuclear security summits designed to lock down all vulnerable nuclear and radiological materials worldwide. Finally, let me say the Global Partnership is multilateral in composition, but it is not a multilateral organization. It is purely voluntary, has evolving national chairs from year to year, contains no permanent secretariat, and includes sets of metrics to measure and assess progress over time. I think these are all good things. Overall, the cooperative threat reduction, the CTR programs have proven to be among the most effective instruments of non-proliferation policy, nuclear security, and activities. It's fair to say that these programs, some of which are bilateral, NunnLugar, for example, and others multilateral, have made the United States and the world much safer. But there's a lot of work that needs still to be done, much work. Okay, with this snapshot, why don't I just ask Bonnie to make her statement.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks to the Hudson Institute for inviting me to speak today. It's good to be back to talk about the Global Partnership, which is something that I spend quite a bit of time on, particularly this year as we chaired the Global Partnership meetings. You've gotten a basic understanding of the Global Partnership, and I'll just say a few more things about what's happened this year. As Andy said, the French last year when they chaired the Global Partnership did decide to extend the Global Partnership beyond its mandate of 2012, which is great. There was no time frame set in the extension. But if this year is any indication, I think we'll probably have a lot more good years of the Global Partnership. This year, one of the things we focused on in the U.S. is one to promote to promote coordination amongst the partners, to focus a lot more on getting information to the partners about projects and programs that exist outside Russia and the former Soviet Union, to implement some of the goals set by leaders last year, to work on more on biosecurity, nuclear radiological security, scientist engagement, implementation of 1540 on a global scale, and also to bring in some new members so that the global partnership is truly global. This year, what we've done, one of the things we've done to implement some of those goals is, as mentioned, to invite all the relevant international organizations to our meetings to help promote coordination and information exchange, and to help funders figure out ways in which they can do programming, not just individually, but through international organizations. So we've had 5 meetings this year, which is one more than normal. Usually it's 4 meetings. And we've invited everyone, all the IOs from OPCW, BWC, ISU, Interpol, UNODA, UNODC, a lot of acronyms, which I think most of you are familiar with. And so that's been very instrumental in really changing the flavor of the meetings. We've also invited all the members to all the meetings. Before there are 4 meetings a year, only 2 of which all the GP members were invited. And right now we have 25. So we've invited all the members to all the meetings, which has really helped to promote coordination and understanding and information exchange among the members. We have also established a number of working groups. And these working groups allow us to focus more on particular issues. We established a working group on new members so that we can focus on bringing in new members. We have Mexico, which just signed last week. We have a number of other countries who are very interested in joining the global partnership, from Latin America, or South America, Africa, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. So we're going to continue to bring them into the global partnership because we don't have members from those regions. We established a working group on centers of excellence. Some of you are familiar with a number of centers of excellence that are being developed all over the world, focusing on nuclear security, some by the EU, focusing on chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear security issues. So we established a working group to focus on that and find ways in which global partners can fund activities and work through some of the existing COEs and training centers that exist. And we established a biosecurity working group, sub-working group. And this group has been extremely active, and I left some documents outside, and you can pick them up on the way out, that focuses a lot on biosecurity. We've worked with a number of international organizations like WHO, the World Organization for Animal Health, the Food and Agriculture Organization, BWC, in establishing a set of deliverables, 5 deliverables that are focusing on biosecurity issues, promoting international health regulations of the WHO. We have another flagship project that is dealing with stocks of rinderpest. Rinderpest is an animal disease that's been eradicated worldwide, and now we're trying to consolidate the stocks of rinderpest. It's another flagship project that we have with the Global Partnership under the Biosecurity Sub-Working Group. So this sub-working group serves as an example of some of the other areas and some of the other things we're doing. Recently, at our last meeting in San Francisco, we established 2 new working groups, one on chemical security and another one on nuclear and radiological security. There are, of the 25 members of the Global Partnership, 24 are part of the Nuclear Security Summit. So that's very instrumental in that there's a number of almost the entire GP for the most part. Very familiar with the summit, attended the summit. There are actually some Sherpas and sous Sherpas from the summit who actually attend some of the GP meetings. So there's a lot of interest in nuclear and radiological security and looking at what the Global Partnership can do to promote the goals of the Nuclear Security Summit, and to promote some of the statements that some countries from the Global Partnership made at the summit for future work. And last year, the global partners agreed to a document that served as the basis for leaders to extend the global partnership. And in that document, we highlight a number of areas which the global partnership could focus on in nuclear and radiological security to promote the Nuclear Security Summit and security of materials in general. And so this document is also sitting outside, and it lists some issues, some areas where the global partnership can start to focus in nuclear radiological security. In addition to that, at the Nuclear Security Summit, the GP members submitted a statement that calculated all the money that the GP members have put toward the IAEA Nuclear Security Fund since 2010. This was submitted as one of the statements of the summit. This is also outside, and it also highlights that the global partnership countries have contributed more than $55 million to the International Atomic Energy Agency Nuclear Security Fund since 2010. And that was another way to show the role that the global partnership has played in the area of nuclear and radiological security. One of the other things that's been very useful is having the 1540 experts attend all of our meetings. We've had a very good dialogue with 1540. Just 3 weeks ago, I was handed a document by Ambassador Sangu, who is the 1540 chair, a document that actually lists the ways in which 1540 will work with the global partnership in the future in exchanging information and finding ways in which the global partnership can match a number of requests that are being sent to the 1540 committee for a number of CBRN type of needs. So we've been very active this year, and if you look at the documents outside, you get a sense of that. Just this past Monday, I was in Geneva, hosting an event with the Director General of the WHO, the Director General of the Organization for Animal Health, and the Deputy Director General for the Food and Agriculture Organization, focusing on the work that's been done this year on the bio side. And for the nuke side, we'll be having our first meeting of the Nuclear Security Working Group in February. Of course, the IAEA will be there, and a number of other relevant organizations will be part of that working group. And we're going to develop projects in ways in which we can, as a global partnership, promote, as I said, promote the goals of the Nuclear Security Summit and the goals of nuclear security in general. I think I'll leave it at that and leave the rest of the time for questions on what's been done.
Great. As I mentioned, I'll start with a couple of questions, picking up on a number of things that Ambassador Jenkins just mentioned. Let's start with membership, first of all, on the global partnership. To mention, well, she and I mentioned that there are now 25 partners, 25 countries, starting with 8, and it's grown over time. The general question I wanted to ask her is whether or not a global partnership, in my judgment, I used to represent the U.S. at the global partnerships a couple of years ago. It's essentially a European organization. Most of the members are European. There are 2 Asian countries now, and three what I call 3 North American countries, if you count Mexico as North American. And there are no countries in the global partnership from Africa, from Middle East, and from South America. And so, in general, my question is the G8 the best fit, even though it's been there now for 10 years, the best fit for the global partnership? Because it does exclude important countries like China and Brazil, India, and others. Would there be another better fit for the global partnership, like the G20, for example, or the Global Initiative, which now numbers about 85 countries? Just throw this out as a general question on the what might be the best fit for the G8, and maybe the G8 global partnership in the G8 is the best fit.
I would say it is for a number of things. We don't really exclude anyone. Countries are welcome to come and join the G Global Partnership. We've actually made a number of overtures to about 19 or 20 countries to try to talk to them about joining the Global Partnership. Mexico was the first to join, and I know that there are a number of countries, as I said, in Southeast Asia. We've had a number of conversations with other countries in South America and in the Middle East who are interested, and we're just going to keep working with them. But I would anticipate we will be getting more countries joining from the conversations that I have had. There was a time when I was concerned that the G8, the G8 logo would be a problem, but as these conversations continue with a number of countries, that's not so much a problem for them anymore. They're starting to see the global partnership, which is we don't emphasize the G8 as much. We call it the global partnership. They see it as a vehicle. It's really a funding mechanism. It's really an action-oriented initiative where there's not a lot of political policy debate. It's really about countries doing actual projects and programs, and they see it as very effective because of that region, and it's drawing countries in who want to actually get some work done and see some activities promoting the goals of, fighting WMD terrorism and promoting nonproliferation. So it's actually, I think, attracting more people because of that. The GICNT is a different type of organization. It's a different type of initiative. It does tabletop exercises and a number of things like that. But the GP is a funding mechanism where we actually are working with other countries who are doing chemical security in Africa, or doing biosecurity in Latin America, or doing nuclear and radiological security someplace else. They're actually projects. And so we find ways that countries can either piggyback with other countries or work through international organizations to achieve their goals. So it's a different type of initiative than I think almost every other one, because it really is about funding. It's actually about really putting where the rubber hits the road. The G20, it's I think it's a different animal also. I don't think they have a huge security side to it. And it's another G, so I'm not sure if that G is better. G20 is better than G8. I mean, we have a number of countries who are in the G20. We've also made overtures to China and to a number of the countries that you've named. We've had discussions with them. So there is ongoing discussion with a number of countries. And we've really just started this real emphasis this year. I mean, prior to this year, we wanted to have new members, but we spent 2 years trying to get extension. And so now that we have extension and we have the leaders saying that we do want to bring in new members, and we established a working group, and the working group really didn't get started until maybe mid this year. And that's when we really started making real efforts to bring countries in. So it's still an early process in terms of really dedicated effort to bring in new partners. So we're pretty happy with Mexico. We hope that will start other countries in their region to join. And as you bring in more countries, hopefully more countries within the different regions will come in as well.
Well, I mentioned this question because, the G8 was originally founded in the 1970s, I think, when it started as the industrial democracies. It was G7. It was the decisions in 2002 with respect to the global partnership was to, in a sense, graft on a whole new set of functions onto what was essentially an economic and financially oriented set of summits. And so it's not unusual for an international organization, or at least like the G8 summits, to take on new functions. It's appropriate. So I just asked, given the fact that it has had limited membership to begin with, although it's growing now, whether there might be a better fit for it, particularly now that it's in this twilight zone of being extended, but not quite sure what that extension means, for how long and how programs are going to be funded.
But I want to say that's not something that bothers us. I mean, there's a lot of initiatives like GICNT doesn't have a due date. I mean, an end date. I mean, these initiatives don't necessarily have end dates, and no one's really concerned about the fact that there's no time frame. I think we all recognize that we're trying to address problems that are global, that are going to be around for a long time. Right. And these countries are going to be it's very unlikely that all 25 countries are going to just stop funding nuclear, rad, biosecurity issues, not fund the IAEA New Security Fund anymore. I mean, it's unlikely because we all recognize that these are things we're engaged in for a long time, because it's a global problem for a long time. So the issue is not so much when is it going to end. The issue is what do we fund? How do we determine what we're going to fund? Where do we fund it? What region? Who wants to join us? Which IO can do the work that we're trying to do? Oh, is there a center of excellence in this region that's also doing that kind of work? It's more on those issues, the actual getting it done, as opposed to focusing on when it might end, because that's not really something we're concerned about.
Now, one of the questions that was sent to me by email before today, actually, I'll just ask that question. And you addressed it somewhat in your opening statement, but the question is, what achievements from this year's U.S. leadership of the global partnership would you list as being the most important, and what areas would you list as requiring additional focus?
I guess a couple of things. One is the engagement with the international organizations. I think that's been one of the best discoveries we've had this year, is the role that they play and the enthusiasm that they bring into the whole process. It's changed the global partnership tremendously, because they're actually sitting in the meetings with us and engaging with us and helping us understand what's going on out there. We know what we find, things that the IAEA is doing, or OPCW is doing, or UN Office of Disarmament Affairs is doing, or You just find out what they're doing, WCO and Customs Organization, they're all there and they're all talking with us. And, it really helps us to figure out what is it that we want to do and where do we want to do it and the role that they can play in helping us. The establishment of working groups is something that we started that the UK is going to continue, which is really good. As I said, at our last meeting, we established these 2 other working groups. It's been really good in promoting funding, because now we have more countries who are going to be funding biosecurity that we're not doing it anymore, and they were not doing it before. And now we're going to do chemical security. We want the same thing to happen in that field, and of course nuclear and radiological, which countries have been funding. But now we can do it in a more focused, at least for the global partnership members, in a way in which we can have flagship projects that promote particular goals of the summit. So I think that'll be good. It'll be more challenging having more working groups, but I think that's one way of increasing funding in the field that we're interested in. So these are ways in which we can continue with the coordination and to continue to identify particular projects. I mean, one thing that we noticed when the global partnership started, when we were talking about extension, there were a number of countries who did not do any kind of assistance programs before the global partnership began. Unlike the U.S., which had been doing NunnLugar, since the early 90s, with our CTR programs, a number of countries weren't doing that work. And so when we were talking about extension, they had a lot of questions, said, okay, not all of us are going to continue to fund Russia, but we haven't funded anywhere else than before. And all we've done is help, fund destruction of nuclear submarines. We haven't done bio, we haven't done chem, we haven't done export controls. How are we going to implement what's this assistance with 1540? And so we realized that this first year of the global partnership, we really had to develop a foundation of education and information exchange about the other threats that exist. Now, of course, we understand other threats exist, but what about the actual programs? And that meant educating, about people going back to their own domestic audiences and explaining, okay, now we're not going to do Russia anymore, and mainly Russia. We're going to go to Africa. We're going to go to Latin America. We're going to go to Southeast Asia. Oh, and by the way, we're going to do biosecurity, which we didn't fund before. So, we had to develop that foundation, and I think that the global partnership this year has done that, and we're going to keep doing that hopefully in the future. So I think that was something that I think the UK recognizes and will continue.
Well, you mentioned the centers of excellence in your remarks, and let me just ask on this question: how much does the global partnership devote its resources, energies, programs to things like nonproliferation training and education, capacity building, in all the fields of nuclear, chemical, biological, radiological?
Mm-hmm.
Is this a new priority? Has it been engaged in these programs for some time?
Well, I guess it would depend. I mean, there are a number of countries, as I said, that all they did before was funding destruction of chemical and of the chemical weapons and submarines in Russia. There are other countries like the U.S., Canada, the U.K., some others who already were starting to fund other types of work, particularly U.S. in 2006 to start to do work outside Russia. And actually, most of the State Department programs are all outside Russia for the most part. And of course, DOE has done more, and DOD increasingly just in the U.S. Now other countries are starting to do that. And a lot of that kind of work is in capacity building. Scientist engagement is, something that the GP, has been doing since the U.S. has been doing since, early 2000s, early 90s with the ISTC and the STCU centers, science centers in Russia and Ukraine, which is really, so we've been doing scientist engagement work, science redirection work rather, for a while. And building capacity to do other things with the knowledge that they have. But a lot of the work that we do now is capacity building. So I would say the percentage, I don't know offhand, but as we do this transition to other types of engagement in other parts of the world for all 25 countries, that will increase, because as you go into Africa, Middle East, South America, Southeast Asia, so much of it is capacity building. There may be an interest to do a lot of the things we want them to do, but they may not have the capacity to do it. And so we need to help. It's not just doing programs, it's making sure that they have the capacity to do it themselves, and that way this work can all be sustained in the future. So as we reach out beyond Russia and reach out to other regions, a larger part of our funding, I think, needs to go into capacity building. So.
I have to ask about NunnLugar and CTR program, of course, because it's been in the news quite a bit in the last several weeks. There's a Russian statements that they want to either discontinue it or to take another look at the NunnLugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program when it expires I think it's next June. And there have been a lot of interpretations of what exactly those statements coming out of Russia have meant. And obviously, President Obama, I think a week or so ago, did address this over at the National Defense University on a different occasion, where he hoped that negotiations on the possible revised umbrella agreement would take place. Let me just ask, we all know that Russia is a very different place today, economically, politically, and so forth, than what it was 20 years ago when the original program to enable programs to take place in Russia were negotiated. Let me ask, have there been any negotiations you're aware of that have started, at least in the preliminary way, over the status of the NunnLugar programs, cooperative threat reduction programs? Have anything started or any negotiations on sustaining this program in some fashion over the next several months or so?
A lot of this is being led by the thing about the State Department. Most of our programs in Russia have pretty much come to. We don't do as much funding in Russia, so a lot of this is led by our colleagues and our sister departments in DoD and DOE, which still has work that they are very interested in doing there. And what I can say is, based on, and I think you obviously read what Obama's statement was at the NunnLugar conference and celebration a couple weeks ago. We're very positive that something can really happen with our discussions with the Russians. We see a lot of the statements that have been made really as a starting position rather than, or part of an ongoing discussion that we've been having with them for a while on this issue of the extension and the future of the NunnLugar program in Russia. So we hear what they're saying in terms of, the change that they feel has been made in Russia since, the early 1990s. And I think that's something that we can work with and we can be a part of our negotiations. But I think we are pretty positive about what can possibly happen with Russia in terms of the actual agreement itself. So we have time in order to do this. And, we are very positive about working towards
As far as you
future.
know, anything been gelling together in terms of setting up?
Well, there's always a lot of discussion that's going on in the U.S. and with our colleagues at DoD and DOE and the White House on this. As far as actual discussions, I'm not positive if there have been yet, but I know we will be having some soon.
Oh, I appreciate that. Let me just open the floor for now, and if there are no questions, I'll come back because I have a bunch of questions I want to ask, and several that have been sent to me to pose to Bonnie as well. So let's start. Richard, do you have some questions that have come in? Oh.
Yeah, just a question about China.
Bring it on. Oh.
But is it? Isn't
That's
it on?
better.
Yeah. Okay. A question about China, really, because that's always been the wonder. People looking at this about how to get China more involved as a stakeholder. It has a lot of resources. Certainly has a commitment to nuclear, countering nuclear terrorism, WMD terrorism. But it's sort of a feeling they really haven't pulled their weight yet, because in a way, the program started before they, they've, as with many of these institutions, they've grown in capacity and resources over time, and they haven't been fully integrated in some that when they weren't in that situation. I wasn't sure how much progress we're seeing in that regard.
I agree with you totally. I think one of the things that we talk with countries about when we approach them about the global partnership is so many of them are already doing things that are global partnership type projects. we pretty much capture all the different WMDs and all the activities and programs. So, including, like I said, funding to the IAEA Nuclear Security Fund. So many countries are already doing what they would be doing if they were global partnership members. It's just a matter of actually joining up to the partnership itself. I would say that initially we had a lot of very positive discussions with China. They were doing a lot of outreach to a number of countries, not just the U.S., but to a number of global partnership countries. And we were really, was meeting with them and talking with them about it. And then it kind of went to kind of a lull for a while. And I don't know if that's because they're trying to think through it internally or what, but I think in the new year we'd like to re-engage with China again on this particular issue because, like I said, we talked to them. We said, you're already doing a lot of this work and you're working on your own Center of Excellence, funding the IAEA Nuclear Security Fund, doing all kinds of things. So yeah, I mean, that's a country that we very much want to join.
Yes, over here. There's a microphone coming around there.
Thank you. I'm assuming there is.
Yeah, could you introduce yourself? I'm
Sure.
sorry.
Ken Meyercord, World Ducks. I'm assuming there's some international convention banning the use of biological and chemical weapons, and that we have stated that we are not engaged in the development or production of such weapons. And that's been our position for quite a while, and yet after 9/11 we have the anthrax scare that shows that we were working on weaponizing anthrax. In light of that, have any countries adopted Ronald Reagan's advice, trust but verified, and insist that we open our facilities for inspection, find out what's happening out there at Fort Detrick?
I'm smiling as I look at Paul Walker, who's our expert on that. You are right. There are conventions that ban CBW and CBW, Biological Weapons Convention, Chemical Weapons Convention. I'm not sure about Fort Detrick. Paul, do you know if we've opened any situation with that one? Do you want to
Paul, you
stand
wanna
up and
comment?
say,
Yes.
yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, there have been, well, go ahead with the mic, pick it up for the TV viewers.
Right here.
Yeah, thanks a lot. On chemical weapons first, the chemical weapons ban comes under the Chemical Weapons Convention, and there's an inspectorate, an international inspectorate of about 150 inspectors in The Hague, and they inspect all the stockpiles and stockpile destruction programs globally. There are 7 acknowledged and declared possessor states of chemical weapons, the United States and Russia amongst them. So we have, I think, very good inspection and verification, trust but verify kind of programs for chemical weapons. For biological weapons issues, there's no verification regime, partly because of the extremely large number, about well over 80,000 potential sites that one might want to verify if you include the whole pharmaceutical and drug industry around the world. On the other hand, the United States, and I think other countries too, but primarily the United States, have promoted transparency initiative, voluntary transparency initiatives. So there have been efforts to open up labs like Fort Detrick and others, and to try to urge the Russians to reciprocate, which they really haven't to date. But I think people realize since the anthrax challenge and problem in 2001 that in fact it's worthwhile to try to open up the biosecurity labs, the BSL-3 and BSL-4 labs, a little bit more to scientific exchanges and initiatives. But none of this is formalized under a multilateral inspectorate. It's all voluntary initiatives. And I think most of us in the field really believe that the United States has really started some very good programs now in trying to open up and show that in fact any of the research going on at BSL-3 and 4 labs is really defensive oriented towards vaccines and the like, as opposed to offensive oriented. And we hope that the Russians in particular will respond in kind eventually.
I just want to make an announcement. I should have made this a couple minutes ago. Anybody who wants to email, who's watching the internet, who wants to send in a question, you can do that. Just send it to me at weitz@hudson.org, or Twitter, it's Hudson at Hudson Institute, one word. Thank you.
Yeah, over here. This guy's getting good exercise. And please identify yourself. Okay.
Going back to the question about the Chinese, I thought I read the other day that the Chinese were facilitating the North Koreans in their nuclear program and their missile program at one point and trying to hide it by covering it up, and a shipment of rocket fuel or something blew up and killed 3,000 people and blew their cover. Is that not accurate?
I have not heard that.
No, I don't know.
Okay. So the Chinese have they been proactive? Have they been just not involved with the international community?
No, I wouldn't.
Because they've been so irresponsible in so many other ways, in places
I
like
wouldn't-
facilitating the
yeah.
Zimbabwean dictatorship and stuff.
I wouldn't say they're not cooperative with the international community. I mean, they are part of a number of conventions, and they are part of a number of implementation bodies, some of which Paul Walker mentioned. So they are engaged. They are part of the Nuclear Security Summit. As I said, they're doing activities and projects that are important. They're funding work on nuclear security of materials. So they are engaged. So it's countries don't always do things that you would like them to do. That's the case all the time. But they are. It's not. I don't think you can say that they're.
Well, they've been really bad. I mean, in Africa with the dictatorships and various other things. And the Europeans historically hadn't put a whole lot of money into this effort. Has that changed recently, or is that still the case?
In the CBRN effort.
Well, all aspects of nuclear security and proliferation issues.
No,
I mean, they didn't. We
They
put
fund nuclear. They fund the nuclear security fund. They're putting a lot of money.
funded to
into
what
it.
level? I mean, how much? How
They're,
much does
they're
the
like
whole?
number 3, I think. They're
sorry?
Actually,
US,
the
yeah.
European Union is the single largest funder of the nuclear security fund at the IAEA.
Right. They put a lot of money.
Has that
into it.
always been the case? Because I thought we were funding it almost alone, and
We
nobody.
fund a lot, but we don't fund it alone. The
Well, I thought
EU
historically, for the last
Yeah.
20 years, most of the time, we were funding it almost exclusively. Is that not correct?
I'm not sure about the last 20 years, but I do know recently the EU has been putting in a lot of money
Okay.
there. And they're also putting a lot of money in establishing these regional centers of excellence. That's going to be looking at all the levels of chemical, biological, nuclear, and radiological security issues and trying to build capacity in a number of regions around the world. So they've been very engaged in these issues. And they're part of the summit, and, they've been doing a lot. And the EU and, of course, the individual countries. So.
Well, that raises an interesting question about economic sustainability of the global partnership. Given the pick up on a little bit of what that discussion was about, given the fact that there is currently a global economic meltdown, I guess that's the best way of putting it, particularly in Europe, which is in a state of recession, what impact is this going to have on continuing to fund the global partnership at the robust level that it's been funded for the first 10 years, again at $20 billion, half of which came from the United States. This is a problem not only of policy preferences, but also a problem of economic sustainability. If the resources are not allocated to the global partnership because they want to divert them elsewhere to domestic needs. So this could be a real crunch in terms of the global partnership maintaining the kinds of active programs that it's had as it expands beyond Russian successor states of the Soviet Union to other areas of the world. So has that been thought about, talked about much at the GA?
Yes, I mean, all countries, including the United States, has less money than we had in 2002 when we first established the GP. So there's less money out there generally. But what we're also finding is countries are starting to fund, like I said, areas that they didn't fund before. So I know of at least 4 or 5 countries who are funding biosecurity for the first time. You have a lot of money that the EU, I said, through their CBRN efforts are doing. Countries are still funding the Nuclear Security Fund. Countries are committing to things in the Nuclear Security Summit to actually take action. So the fact that there's less money generally doesn't mean there's going to be less money totally forever. And there's the amount has gone down, but that doesn't mean it won't be sustained. It's going to be sustained at a lower amount. But we are just in the process of putting together our annex for this year. And every year the Global Partnership has an annex that lists all the activities and programs that the partners are doing anywhere around the world, whatever kind of program it is, from training to funding the IEA fund to biosecurity. And we're getting a lot of information from countries about what they're still doing. So Overall numbers, well, reality is overall numbers was going to go down because that's just the way it is. But the interest is still there, and I think the question now is, how do we take what funds we have and make sure that they're effective, and how do we, not that they're not going to stop funding this work. It's more they'll fund it at a lesser amount, and they'll try to make it much more effective. I think that's really the issue, and that's one thing we try to help countries with is by having the discussions we have at the Global Partnership, by having the IOs there, by having the 1540 experts there, we have enough folks who talk about the projects and how countries can fund projects in a way that are effective, but also how they can work together to fund work so that, you may not have as much money as you had before to fund a particular activity, but if 5 countries get together and fund a little bit of it, then it could still take place. So, you have to be creative and you have to find ways to do it, but the interest is there and the knowledge that it has to be done is still there, and I think that's what's important.
Now, you mentioned the annex to the Global Partnership, and I remember the annex quite well because, as I mentioned in my opening statement, that there are built-in metrics in the Global Partnership, which allows partners to evaluate and assess how much progress they're making from year to year. Is that annex available? Is it
It's online.
unclassified?
It's online. It's
It's online?
unclassified.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that anybody wants to analyze and assess the progress of the Global Partnership from the beginning till now, that's the place to look for the good data, because it lays out what individual countries are doing, what collaborative programs that exist, the amount of money that's being committed, the amount of money that's being expended on programs, and so forth and so on. It's really a useful tool for analysis.
And this year, we're actually making it more useful for folks, because what we're doing is we're asking for more information, and we're asking for not just individual countries, but by regions, so we can say, for example, how much money are the 25, or actually 24 since Mexico just joined, how much are they putting in Southeast Asia? How much are we putting in, Africa? What's all the money that's going to biosecurity? I mean, so we're making it so it could be much more useful, and not just for the GP members, but for anyone who wants to know what's being funded by these countries.
Well, I'll ask another question then. I'm interested in the decisions both at the French and the U.S. G8 summits about supporting the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1540 and its successor resolutions. Could you talk a little bit about that? I mean, what are the ways in which the Global Partnership will get involved in the implementation of 1540? We recall it's a mandatory set of requirements that countries have to undertake under this resolution. So where is the Global Partnership feeding its role into implementation of the 1540?
Well, to start out, in the document that's outside, that's on the assessment of the future of the Global Partnership, we actually have a paragraph that talks about 1540 and what we envisioned, and this is right before the extension decision was made, that the GP could do with them. And as I said, we've had the experts attend all of our meetings. I've gone to New York several times to speak with them, and on our website we have 2 documents. One that was a statement that was made by Ambassador Sangu, the chair of the 1540 committee, when he attended our meeting in Stockholm, our GP meeting in Stockholm, the first GP meeting outside a G8 country, by the way. And also the research document that was given to me by Ambassador, that was by the 5040 committee itself, and it actually outlines some of the work that we could do together. But I think if you think about it, it's a natural fit. I mean, the GP is CBRN, it covers everything, and the 1540 is CBRN, it covers everything. And the 1540 accepts requests for requested needs from states on a regular basis, and we provide funding for states to do activities. So it's kind of a natural fit in terms of matchmaking the requests that come in and the needs that the global partnerships can meet. We're also doing things that may be requests from states that 1540 didn't know we were doing. So one thing that we're doing is making sure that they know what countries are doing around the world, so that if they're getting a request from a country for the very same thing we're actually doing, that they can say that, wow, we're meeting that need. One thing that was really helpful is in January at our first meeting this year, the 1540 committee came in with a list of all of their requests, and they put it on PowerPoint slides, and there were a lot of them, but they were all on PowerPoint slides. And they listed also which countries could actually, which GP countries could actually provide assistance based on those requests. And they also put the relevant IOs. So, I mean, so here you have, if, you know, particular country wanted to do biosecurity in, a particular GP country wanted to do biosecurity in Southeast Asia, one vehicle is not only discussing it amongst the partners, but they could go to the actual request that came in from that country and look at it and try to address those needs, but also keeping the 1540 involved so that they'll know that the need has been met. So it's kind of a necessary, in a way, it's a necessary relationship in order to really keep an understanding of what's going on between what's being funded, not just money, but in kind as well, because, you know, it's not just money all the time that GP can fund work. And then there's things that we can help fund, you know, help fund G1540 activities. You know, they can make requests to GP members at a meeting and say, we want to do a conference here. GP members may want to help fund it. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which we can work together.
Can you
with
mention
that
any,
committee.
do you have any concrete examples on that that might be useful, that where this link up with 1540 and the global partnership has actually led to specific decisions by the partners in GP to actually go forward and assist?
There are, I mean, I don't remember offhand, but I know there are a number of times during our meetings, the rep from UNODA, which is the United Nations Organization for Farmers Affairs, is Office of the Farmers Affairs, they actually implement a lot of they actually they receive funds to actually host a number of 5040 regional meetings. So there have been occasions where he or she would say, when we open up the floor for the international organizations to speak, they would say, we received funding from this particular partner for this event.
Okay.
We received funding from this, you know, one of the other partners for that event. And the other IOs would do the same thing.
Now, this would be in the annex, this information would be?
We hope. But the thing is, we hope that countries will always, that sometimes countries don't always give themselves credit for all the work that they're doing, because there's always activities that we find out that a country's either funding an NGO, because that's counted as well, if they're funding NGOs to do work, if they're funding GIC&T to do work, if they're funding, you know, anything, they should be counting all of this. Sometimes countries don't remember to do that. But we have a pull-down menu where it's 1540, and if they're doing 1540 type work, they should put that in the annex. So where they actually count it, we know about it. Yeah.
Oh, up front. Who's got, oh, there it is.
I wanted to come back to the money question a little bit, because I think that's, in a lot of ways, where the rubber meets the road, as we say. I mean, first of all, I would make a brief comment, Andy, that you know, the United States was really the original player in this whole, as you both know well, in this whole game, starting with the NunnLugar program in 1991, 92. But in the 1990s, you know, we were getting a lot of pressure that there were no other countries sort of participating, and so in the late 90s, the Canadians and the Germans actually, and the British got involved kind of unilaterally as well. But then the 2002 creation of the Global Partnership was a big step forward, because that we could argue here in Washington that in fact the burden was being shared amongst, you know, at that point 15 or 16 or 18 countries. So it's great that it's up to 25 now. And I think in the first 10 years, the $20 billion pledge that was made was more than met, particularly given that the United States spent well over its $10 billion commitment. But the big players there, the first 10 years, are really the Americans, the Canadians, the Germans, and the British, those four. I think the Germans come in second, particularly in chemical weapons destruction. But there were countries that really seriously fell back. And the two I would mention, there are probably more, but the two major ones, I think, were Italy and France. And those were both very disappointing in not meeting their pledges and not spending the money, or in some ways not meeting the commitments they had made at Kananaskis in 2002. So I'm wondering today, with the recommitment now of all these countries and still more, particularly Russia coming in now as a partner, Mexico coming in, and perhaps India, China, and others in the future, hopefully. Are you really optimistic, Bonnie, that these countries will be able to meet actual financial commitments? Right now I only see the United States and Germany and Canada to some extent playing a major role financially in the global partnership. Other countries like Australia, the Netherlands, the Scandinavians, and others who've also played very good and positive, or Switzerland, who've played major and positive roles, don't seem to be spending any funds at all. So I'm wondering, number one, are you optimistic on financial commitments in the, say the next 5 years? And number two, I think one of the other biggest challenges in the global partnership now is as we expand it beyond Russia and go into developing areas, particularly in Africa and Asia, I think the whole issue of sustainability rises to the forefront as well, that you raised earlier, Andy. And are these countries willing, the G8 or other industrialized countries, willing to make longer-term commitments so in fact a 1 or 2 year project doesn't in fact fall apart 2 or 3 years later with totally inadequate funding in these poor countries that we get involved in?
Well, there's a lot of speculation for that. I mean, I guess the first answer is I do believe that these countries will, because a lot of them are. Norway spends a lot of money. They put a lot of money towards these issues. And it's all relative. I mean, everyone can't be the U.S., everyone can't be the U.K., everyone can't be Canada, and we don't expect them to be. What we want is countries to continue to fund work at the level that they can, and they have been. And Sweden is a perfect example of dedicating a lot less money than the U.S., but still being very effective in what they do. Norway puts a lot of money in NGOs in addition to what they do. I mean, I'm always hearing about what Norway's funding, and I'm just hoping they're putting it all in their annex. And so there are countries who still continue to fund it at the levels that they can fund it, and countries like Italy and France, which were not able to finish all of their commitments, they're very dedicated to the GP. Italy is doing work on their own training center of excellence in nuclear security that they've developed. So they're doing things in their own way, but the thing is, it's all counts. The money that they're putting toward their commitments in the nuclear security summit counts toward GP. So, and they come to all the meetings and they're very interested in what's going on. So, I mean, I think a lot of it's also just riding out the time and see what happens, and hopefully the financial situation for all of us will get better, and then they can actually do more generally. But there's a lot of smaller countries who are doing a lot of work, and you look at countries like Australia and New Zealand who are doing a lot of work in their own region with the islands out there. I mean, they hold regional conferences on export controls. They're our major conduit to those smaller islands that we never really travel to very much, and we're hoping that they will continue to do that. Australia usually submit one line in their annex, and I said that can't be true. You must be doing more than that. They just submitted it, and they have a lot more information now because they started to realize we need to start counting all the work that we've been doing in these areas and it could be because different parts of their own government fund different things, but it doesn't matter who's funding it. We just want, if it's working toward GP goals, that's what matters. So, we have countries who can do a lot and countries who can do a little, but we welcome all of it. As far as new countries, I mean, sustainability is always an issue, and that's something that I think as the times are a lot tighter financially, I think sustainability becomes even more important because it's even more important that what we do is sustained. It increases the importance of engaging all countries that we're in terms of making sure that they can sustain the work after the funding leaves. But having countries who are from quote unquote recipients, we don't like to use that term very much anymore, as partners in the GP will be interesting. Having them in there, countries who we are already funding work, who we know they have a real interest in the issue. They may not have the money to do it, but they're always willing to be good hosts for events like Jordan, for example, and other countries who put money toward the issues, but they're also countries that the U.S. and others are very interested in doing work. We have long-established relationships with these countries and doing activities. So there's a value for us for having it as part of the global partnership and being part of the dialogue. And it'll be an interesting dynamic because, of course, some of these countries that we're seeking won't have a lot of the financial backing to do big projects, but they may have expertise that from years that we've been there doing work, and they've been working with us. There may be regional leaders who can be a voice for that region. And just countries we want to bring into the dialogue. So how you value their contribution can be just money. It could be also in kind in terms of personnel, and it could be what they bring to the discussion. That helps all of us. So.
Let me comment on that just briefly, Paul, because I think it's important about the funding. Keep in mind that the commitments, the pledges that are made are political commitments rather than they're not legally binding. Things change over time. But by way of a footnote, when I was representing the U.S. at the Global Partnership, as early as I think 2006, 2007, can't recall, I was actually, speaking autobiographically here, I was able to convince at a meeting at the National Security Council that the United States, I was allowed to make an announcement at the Global Partnership. The United States is prepared not only to support an extension of the Global Partnership, but we're prepared to cough up and pledge another $10 billion. I actually made that in the hopes that others would sort of jump in line and try to not exactly emulate the United States, but certainly be willing to continue to fund that. I don't think we have any, bona fide commitment. As I say, it's a political commitment that's made at one point in time, and things change over time. But I'm a little worried too about the funding predictability, sustainability of the Global Partnership, because it's a program, as I mentioned, that I think is a high achieving program, very important to our safety and security around the world.
Well, I would just say if you attended one of our meetings, you would not be worried. There's
Okay.
there's a lot of interest. It's really it's almost a whole different global partnership now. I mean, it's just with the IOs there and all the parties at every single meeting. The meetings are 2 days now. They're no longer 1 day. There's a lot of enthusiasm. I'll have to invite you to one of our meetings. You could see.
Like a reunion of sorts. Any other questions? Yeah, Ryan.
You mentioned the sorry. The question is on implementation of commitments during the Nuclear Security Summit, and I was wondering if you can elaborate on what type of commitments partnership is helping to implement. Thanks.
Well, I will have to say we haven't had our first meeting of the Nuclear Security Working Group yet. The first meeting is going to be in February at the first meeting underneath the UK chairmanship. And at that meeting, we are going to determine what the mandate of the working group is going to be. But like I said, because 24 to 25 members attend the summit, there's a very strong knowledge of what's going on. Some of the attendees, like the UK at the summit, made statements like on information security. So we know for a fact information security is going to be one of the issues because the UK is chairing next year the Global Partnership. Japan made statements on transportation security, for example. The U.S. has been engaged in outreach efforts and a bunch of other areas. So I think the list. I don't think we'll have a problem figuring out a mandate for the working group. It's going to be a question of which one it's going to be because there's commitments in the work plan. There's things in the communiques from both years, both summits in the past. There's all the statements you mentioned, and the other gift baskets. So there's enough there. But I think that whatever the working group decides to work on as its mandate, it'll be something that's included in one of those mini documents. Because I think those cover pretty much everything that we could be working on internationally to cover nuclear security for the most part.
Let me pick up on that question, Ryan, with the Nuclear Security Summit. There have been two nuclear security summits, 2010, 2012. The third is scheduled for, excuse me, my voice, The Hague in 2014. I think most, but not all, people who are observing the nuclear security summits believe that may be the third and last summit that takes place. But there's an issue that since there's a lot of work that needs to be done, that the nuclear security summit and the activities like gift baskets and house gifts and so forth that emerge out of that, that will be left undone after 2014, the third summit, and how to sustain that momentum that the summits have generated over the past several years and through 2014 and beyond is, I think, an important question that we all need to address. And my question to you, is it possible, for example, to sustain that kind of activity in the absence of a nuclear security summit beyond 2014, that nuclear security summit ethos and plans and objectives could be integrated into the G8 summits, which maybe it could be a set of topics that could come up every other year or every 2 years or something like that in the G8, and it needs to be anchored someplace. If I'm correct in saying the 2014 Nuclear Security Summit is the third and final such summit as summit fatigue sets in, much like the G8 incorporated the global partnership and the nonproliferation directors groups and things like that into it over the past 10 years. Why not? Is it possible the G8 could incorporate the same goals of the Nuclear Security Summit along the same pattern post 2014?
That's a good question. We haven't really thought about it in terms of the G8 summit itself. We have thought about in terms of different. First of all, I would say there's no decision made about what happens after 2014. There's still discussion about it. We discussed it at the first Sherpa meeting in Istanbul, 2-3 weeks ago. So there's no decision on that, and no position from the U.S. at this time on that one. But there is discussion on the different platforms that could carry on the summit. Obviously, the IAEA would be one such platform, but there may not be just one. There may be several that we can look to take on that role of high-level attention to this issue. As I said, the Nuclear Security Working Group, as an initiative, will be doing things to promote the goals of the summit. And I'm sure there's other initiatives like GIC&T will focus on things like, nuclear forensics and other things that were highlighted in the work plan. But we haven't, that's a good question. Could the G8 summits be a vehicle, not the only vehicle, of course, there's only G8. But, could there be something in the G8 summits that references the Nuclear Security Summit? I mean, that's a possibility. And I think that right now we're looking at what the possibilities are. So that could be, just having a statement in the summit documents or on the summit, that's worth thinking about.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's an important question. I think the Nuclear Security Summit, in my opinion, was a big idea. It involved, creative, big thinking, and I think it needs and has accomplished quite a bit, perhaps not as much as some of us would like, but nonetheless has accomplished quite a bit. And it's important that it be sustained beyond 2014. Anybody who hasn't asked a question, hold on. Okay. No,
I'm Edmund Reynolds with Citizens to Stop Nuclear Terrorism, a nonprofit group that tries to get business leaders in America to understand the terrible threat. Almost no business leader I've talked to probably 400, has a clue what's going on. They know less than the janitor who cleans their room that night. This is an aside. I was talking to Brian Finley at the Stimson Center the other day, and he was telling me about a strategy they have. They say a lot of the third world countries don't have any interest in the topic, really, because they don't feel like they're at risk. But they are worried about handguns and the violence, because that kills a lot of people. So they try to get funding that will talk about interdiction of handguns, which is also interdiction of nuclear materials. Is that something that you all have done or seen done, or do you work with Brian? You know Brian Finley?
I know him very well. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, I know him very well. I know the way in which the Stimson Center actually promoting that idea. And first of all, I agree with you about the business leaders. I mean, there is an organization called BINS, which I was just going to say, I'm not sure. Yeah, the Logical Group. Yeah, I've been out of that I used to be at the Ford Foundation, and one of the things I was interested in trying to fund was increasing business leaders' interest in. Yeah, it was always a challenge. It was a challenge. But But yes, I've talked with Brian a lot about that, and you know, I know at the State Department with our export control program, one of the things we do promote is that very idea. You know, when you go to different countries, like in Africa, South America, wherever, Southeast Asia, Middle East, you know, we're working outside where we worked for the past 10 years, at least for the Global Partnership. When you go into these countries where their perception of threat is not the same as our perception of threat. I mean, for us, we put WMD way at the top, but as you mentioned, that's not as far up for them. They're caring more about small arms and drugs and other kind of trafficking, which is, yeah, but, yeah, because that's what they see every day. So they're going to respond to the threat that they see on a regular basis, and it's just human nature to do that. So, but the way in which we address that is to find what Brian was talking about, find common areas where our funding their work would help them not only with their issues, but understand how it would help our issues. So if you're worried about a border and you're worried about trafficking, we're worried about, materials of WMD. They're worried about small arms, but it's the same border. And we need to strengthen that border to reduce trafficking generally. And so, if you take that perspective of trying to understand what the country that you're in understands as their own threat perception, I think it has a lot more chances of sustainability in the end.
I would caution what you said, because there are a number of organizations like WINS, the World Institute for Nuclear Security, and nuclear industry, for example, on the nuclear side, has been very deeply involved in this, and particularly in safety issues and security issues and the like. And, just by way of a commentary footnote on this, and I think public opinion polls would support this, that if you look out in the U.S. Population in general, you would find that American business personnel, let's call them, who are involved in international business, international corporations, are probably among the most internationalist-oriented people, because that's where they're doing business. There are people who support international organizations, foreign assistance, and programs like that, because it's, quite frankly, it's in their interest. Yeah, yeah.
I'm not saying they're not interested. I'm just saying they have the knowledge. There's 5 million pounds of fissile material out there.
Right.
And if you say to the CEO of a major Silicon Valley company, take a guess what the amount of poundage is, they guess 50,000,
Right.
500. They're all like kilos to make.
Right.
And they don't have a clue as to how easy it is to make a food that affects the
Yeah.
like the second year physics student that Princeton told us in 1979 how to do. They don't know whether it's easy or not to inject it in the United States. You know what we mean?
Yeah, and I think a lot will depend on, I think Andy is also right, and I also think it depends on, which industry you're talking about, and I know the chemical industry was very involved in the chemical weapons issue for a while, and they have, some of them in the U.S. have some of the best chemical security standards. They may not be true in some other countries. It may vary, but it all depends on what you're talking about in terms of what you're saying. I think that's also the case as well. But I think that's true of a lot of people in general. I mean,
Scenario you're worried about it. You drive Graham Allison and says a 5% annual rate percentage of risk of a major nuclear terrorist attack. If someone getting 100 pounds, making the bomb and bringing it in on the SUV or a plane or a boat up the chest, it's saying it all.
No, I agree, and I think that, but that's an issue for the U.S. in general, and popular understanding about these issues. And I think it's more of an issue where you're concerned where if it's an industry that's actually involved with, it's a business leader who has a business that could be impacted most directly by those kind of things. I think that's when it gets really, really scary. Yeah, they're all being impacted.
One question here, again, that came in through email. Let me ask you. You've already addressed some of this, Bonnie, but let me ask it. Maybe you can amplify it a little bit. Says here, the global partnership has been expanded to include additional important topics such as bioengagement. What other topics or threats should be addressed in the future? And what topics have the UK suggested as priorities for next year as they assume the leadership of the global partnership, 2013?
Well, I guess the other issues that are out there now that we're not covering would be nanotechnology. That seems to be an issue that is getting more cyber. I mean, cyber is a big one, obviously. And I think we might attack some of that with the UK's focus on information security. I think there'll be a part of it that might capture some cyber. Then there's nanotechnology, which I'm just learning about, which is a little scary. So I'm
Contact some
learning about-
teenagers someplace to help you.
Right. So we don't address those. I don't know if the GP will ever address that issue. Of course, the members can address whatever they agree to address in the future. So if that ever got to a point where we felt we needed to do that as part of the global partnership, the members can always decide that that's something they want to do. But I think those are the two emerging issues that we're seeing. Cyber probably more than the other.
Let me ask a related question to that. That's from your, since you've done this now for what, 4 years, and I understand you'll be staying on as you're in this position. Do you have a priority wish list of what you would like to see the global partnership accomplish next 4 years? That perhaps you're dancing around the subjects right now, something that they would look into that needs some priority attention that the GP could begin to address?
I'm pleased with the biosecurity because I think we're doing a lot in that. Nuclear, I think countries are funding nuclear security issues. I think we'd like to have a real focus on ways in which we can really help the Nuclear Security Summit have a strategy in a way in which we could do that, really promote, 3 or 4 particular goals that we can really fund. And then there's chemical security. I mean, it'd be great if we could if we could have a couple of flagship projects that we can get countries to fund, a number of countries to fund, maybe a particular region that needs more help on chemical security, or maybe industries, a particular region that can use more focus on developing their security. So I'm happy. We'll see what kind of flagship projects we can get in these other two areas. And working better with 1540, I think we can never make that strong enough because that is a, Security Council resolution, Chapter 7 resolution that countries are mandated to abide by. So ways in which we can promote that and help countries with the assistance that they need for them to abide by 1540, I think would be good.
Okay. Richard?
I think that's about it. Unless there's any more questions, I'm just going to ask you one.
Anything coming in online? Or?
No. But so I'm going to ask you, building on the question that Andy asked about the last 4 years in office. I do want to ask you, look back over your career. You've had a very interesting career. You've done worked in some of the executive commissions, been at RAND, Ford Foundation. I'm going to ask this because from outside we always are a bit impatient. We want to see more progress, and I'm curious, being in the inside so much, can you give us a sense of what's been your difference? Is there anything you've learned that you want to communicate to us, having served outside and inside, that it's useful for us to keep in mind as we go forward in this endeavor?
I think understanding the way the government works and finding a strategy to achieve your goals within that work, within that process is very important. I think that coming from someone who's been outside and inside the government, now that I'm inside the government again, we've achieved a lot this year in the global partnership. And, I think having a good understanding of the way the government works, the way things move through the government, and then setting a goal and having a strategy and getting the right people on board within the government and outside the government to achieve something, I think has been very useful for me. And I think that's something that I've learned throughout the years. Because for me, at the end of the day, you want to feel like you've actually gotten something done, that you've actually achieved something. And that's why one of the reasons why I like the global partnership as much as I do is because it's action oriented and it's very much, you can look and see what you're doing. You can actually, you can really see it, and you can see what you're implementing. And you feel like at the end of a week you can actually point to what you've achieved. And so, but you have to know how to make it happen. You have to know how to make it work, and you have to know how governments work. And I think that's a big lesson that I've learned. So,
Richard, let me just say something maybe a little bit humorous. Your question reminded me 20 years ago or so, on the Johnny Carson show. Some of you may remember that. He had Conrad Hilton as his guest, And he said to Conrad Hilton, he says, "You've been a major entrepreneur, owner, one of the best hotel entrepreneurs the world has ever seen. You've visited, 60, 70 countries where you've had collected talent and did amazing things in your career. Can you tell us one lesson that you've learned after all that successful year over the past 50 years or so?" And Conrad Hilton's feigned thinking about this, and he said, yes. He said, "It's better to leave the shower curtain inside the tub than outside." So I was remember that for some reason. Anyway, maybe that was all planned, but it looked like a good response. I think if for no other questions, let me thank Bonnie for.
Yeah, let me thank
okay,
you
you
both.
wanna do it?
Actually, we're at this. So because especially Andy, you've done this so many times for us, and Ambassador Jenkins, second time she's been here. So please join me in thanking them all for that. I also I want to thank Jamie Bologna, who's been basically we're short-handed today because of the holidays and so on. He's been running the entire media outlet, so we owe him a big thanks. And Julian for probably because of his military training, the one intern who came here really early on time and is helping run the show today. So join me, and I want to thank them, and then I want to wish everybody a happy holidays.
Yeah, thanks.